cry.
We laugh, we cry, we live, we die. We dance, we sing our song. We need to feel there's something here to which we can belong. We need to feel the freedom just to have some time alone. But most of all, we need close friends we can call our very own. And we believe in life and in the strength of love. And we have found our need to be together. We have our hearts to give, we have our thoughts to receive, and we believe that sharing is an answer. A child is born among us and we feel a special glow. We see time's endless journey as we watch the baby grow. We thrill to hear imagination freely running wild, but dedicate our minds and hearts to the spirit of this child. And we believe in life and in the strength of love, and we have found our time to be together. And with the grace of age, we share the wonder of youth, and we believe that growing is an answer. Our lives are full of wonder and our time is very brief. The death of one among us fills us all with pain and grief. But as we live, so shall we die, and when our lives are done, the memories we shared with friends, they will linger on, and we believe in life and in the strength of love, and we have found a place to be together. We have the right to grow, we have the gift to believe that peace within a living is an answer. We seek elusive answers to the questions of this life. We seek to put an end to all the waste of human strife. We search for truth, equality, and blessed peace of mind. And then we come together here to make sense of what we find. And we believe in life and in the strength of love. And we have found our joy being together. And in our search for peace, maybe we'll finally see, even to question truly is an answer.
Thank you for joining us here in person, and thank you for joining us remotely by Zoom, where we will continue live streaming and posting these services on our YouTube channel for our virtual attendees. I'm Grace Preuss, a member of the committee of the worship committee, and I will be your worship associate today. Other members of the worship committee you will hear from include Alec Peck, who will be helping us sing our hymns. We welcome you to join us this morning with an open mind and an open heart, and with muted electronic devices, please. Our Unitarian heritage calls us to recognize the inherent good of all persons, while the Universalist part of our tradition encourages us to extend love and acceptance to all people. You are welcome in this congregation, whatever your gender identity, racial identity, faith tradition, or class. Our principles call us to affirm the worth and dignity of every individual, to accept one another, and to foster each other's spiritual growth. We are glad to have you join us today. Although our doors are open, the pandemic is not over. So while we are in the sanctuary, please keep your masks on and socially distance. And now I invite you to sit back and take a slow, deep breath as we move into our worship hour. For our call to worship, you are welcome to read with me the mission statement of our church. Our mission is to foster a diverse religious community that celebrates life, affirms the individual, encourages spiritual growth and open thought, and works to advance social justice and environmental sustainability. We are privileged today to welcome Deborah Wong as our speaker as we continue to celebrate Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. Deborah Wong is an ethnomusicologist and professor of music at the University of California, Riverside. She has written 3 books, Louder and Faster, Pain, Joy, and the Body Politic in Asian American Taiko, Speak It Louder, Asian Americans Making Music, and Sounding the Center, History and Aesthetics in Thai Buddhist Ritual. She served as an editor for Nobuko Miyamoto's extraordinary memoir, Not Your Butterfly, My Long Song of Relocation, Race, Love, and Revolution. Active in public sector work at the national, state, and local levels, she is a curator for the new Asian Pacific America series for Smithsonian Folkways. And in 2021, she joined the boards of the Chinese American Museum, DC, and the community-based Asian American arts nonprofit, Great Leap. Her happiest hours of the week are spent preparing and then going on air with her weekly radio show, Gold Mountain, for KUCR 88.3 FM in Riverside. Asian American responses to anti-Asian hate range from silence to flight, self-defense, and organizing. Dr. Deborah Wong will reflect on the recent surge of anti-Asian violence in the US by sharing what her friends and family have said when in a space of Asian American safety. Deborah shows how interethnic solidarity work by Asian Americans has been an essential response. Now we will have our 2 lightings of sacred flames. The first is the occupied Indigenous Peoples Remembrance Candle. The second is the lighting of our own chalice, the symbol of our faith. We walk upon the traditional territories of diverse and sovereign peoples, the original people of this land, who continue to cry out for justice and self-determination. This spot we occupy was first a sacred space of several groups of Indigenous peoples, including the Cahuilla, the Cupeño, and the Serrano. We, the Universalist Unitarian Church of Riverside, light this sacred flame as the stewards of this sacred and holy place. We are blessed with a space and opportunity to strive to live out our common principles, to bring justice, equity, and compassion into our daily lives, to resist all that threatens the earth and her people, and to be part of a world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. Let these thoughts carry us forth as we journey and worship together. Today's reading of the chalice lighting is A Spark of Hope by Melanie Davis. If ever there were a time for a candle in the darkness, this would be it. Using a spark of hope, kindle the flame of love, ignite the light of peace, and feed the flame of justice.
Uvalde, Texas. Possible.
Thank you, Bill. This portion of our service is called Greeting Our Guests. We have a tradition at UUCR to welcome those who are visitors or perhaps returning after some time away. We know it can be uncomfortable to stand up and speak in front of others, and so I will now ask for a volunteer from someone who has been here for a while to tell us your name and how you found out about our church. We ask you to step close to the mic in the front and speak into it directly and clearly so that everyone can hear. Do we have any volunteers today? Good morning.
Hi, my name's Jenny O'Haver, and I'm happy to be here. I come down from Big Bear when I can. It's good to see you all.
Thank you, Jenny. So that's how it's done. If you are new here, a visitor, or an old friend, please raise your hand to stand and come up to the mic in front of the pulpit. All right. If there's someone online who would like to introduce themselves, please raise your hand and we will call on you by Zoom. Please let us know who you are, where you are from, and how you found out about us. So for any other new guests, please join us for socializing and coffee hour after the service. We'd love to chat with you out in the parish hall, where you can also find our visitors book. Please leave your name before you leave so that we know you are here, and leave your contact information if you'd like to know about upcoming events. For those online, the best way to get added to the mailing list is to email the church office at admin@uuchurchofriverside.org. Now there are a few announcements that we'd like to share. During the service, we will mention several websites, email addresses, and phone numbers. At the end of the service, we will leave up a slide with all of this information, and it is also available on our website. This is Memorial Day weekend. Let's observe a moment of silence to honor and remember those who have served to defend our freedom, as well as to pray for a peaceful future. The first Sunday luncheon in June will be moved to June 12th before the congregational meeting. On June 5th, we will ring in the summer with ice cream sundaes after the service. Suggestion of Dinah. Please join us for our family barbecue on May 30th. Tickets are pre-sale only, $20 for adults, $12 for children 6 to 12, and free for children 5 and under. There will be a 50-50 UUCR maintenance fund raffle. This is a fun opportunity to contribute to the upkeep of our beautiful and historic church. Raffle tickets will be sold for $5 each and put in a pot. A winning ticket will be selected from the pot at our summer barbecue on May 30th, and the proceeds will be split, with 50% going toward the church designated maintenance fund and 50% to the raffle winner. Please see Robert or Avery in the church for details. Thank you for your participation. Our hymn now is number 123, Spirit of Life, from the Gray Hymnal. Please feel free to sing as the Spirit moves you, but please keep your masks on. Please stand and embody your spirit and join us in singing 123, Spirit of Life.
Of compassion,
sharing our stewardship. This portion of our service is to support a beloved historical church. This can be accomplished in several ways. In addition to the weekly collection, you may send your checks to the church address, which is shown here. You may contribute by PayPal using the QR code, which is on the church website and also in the newsletter. Stater Brothers Market gives our church a rebate on Stater's grocery cards, which we will have in church each Sunday. You get the full value, and the church also receives a percentage. Please donate as the Spirit moves you by whatever method works best for you. Thank you for your generosity, and to those who give of their time and their talent, thank you for your generous care and attention. Will our ushers now please come forward to receive the collection? Our next hymn, number 402, From You I Receive, is from the Gray Hymnal. Feel free to sing again as the Spirit moves you, but please only with your masks on. Please stand and embody your spirit and join us in singing hymn number 402, From You I Receive.
From you I receive, to you I give, together we share, from this we live.
From you I receive, to you I give, together we share, from this we live. From you I receive, to you I give, together we share, and from this we live.
Our meditation today is a reading from Tracy Kato Kiriyama's Navigating Without Instruments, Poetry, Micro-Essays, Notes to Self. When creating a space, know that you are co-creating. Co-create a space of self-determination that can be sustainable for the long haul. Bring in as many as want to be in, each taking on a small task of the whole. Reject the superwoman fallacy. Lean into each person's experience, craving, and curiosity. When co-creating a space, always ask of self and the team, what is the win-win, win-win, win? How does the artist win in an effort that is grassroots and all volunteer? How will you do your best to make sure they look good, sound good, feel good on stage, and more importantly, before and after the event? How are we building relationships and genuine support in the long term? How does the audience win? Who is the audience? Who is in the room? Who is not in the room? How does the community win? Who is present? Who is past? Who is future? How does the larger world around us win, even if they never know we exist? How does the team win? The generous crew of folks who go out of their way, many never to take the stage, to ensure all of the above. Feel the winds. Now let us pause for a moment of silence. Now, I would like to introduce Deborah Wong, speaking to us on Two Friends, Three Cousins, One Poem, Anti-Asian Hate. Deborah?
Good morning, everyone. Such a pleasure to be here. I've been here so many times to so many great events, community gatherings, important gatherings, many of them focused on social justice. It is a great pleasure to be here. This is such an important space. Alec, whenever you're ready, could you switch yeah. I want to talk a bit today because these are the last few days of May, the last few days of the annual Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. And as I always say, for many of us, every day, every month is Asian Pacific Heritage Month. But May is very special to many of us. And so I watched Jean Moy's presentation here remotely with great pleasure. I'm just so happy, grateful, pleased that the UU Church has chosen to recognize Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. Great. So I want to talk a bit about the ways in which the people I know experience anti-Asian hate. This is without doubt one of the issues of our moment, but it is not a new issue, even though it takes new forms all the time. I'm Chinese American, I'm multi-ethnic, and as I always say, I am 100% Asian American. My father was Chinese American, my mother was white. I'm basically third generation Chinese American, and I did not know my mother's family because of anti-Asian hate. Basically, when my mother decided in 1955 to marry my Chinese American father, her family disowned her, and I never knew any of them. I never knew any of them. So these are things that, that some of us live with, is my point. I am not going to talk today from my personal experiences, but rather to try and give you a bit of a broader perspective, again, speaking from the people I know. I start with this logo, which moved around on social media about a year ago in March of 2021, right after the Atlanta murderers. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, of course, I would encourage you to look it up. And I think what I'm talking about will become clear as I proceed. But I regard this particular logo as being a strong solidarity statement, because look at the lower right of the logo. It was put out by the NAACP, right? It was not put out by an Asian American organization. It was put out by a leading African American organization. This is the nature of solidarity, right? The ways in which we show up for one another, and the ways in which we create new structures and new systems of showing up for one another. This morning, I'm not going to talk about a whole bunch of things. I'm not going to talk about, I'm not going to give you Asian American history from the beginning. I'm not going to talk about, oh, what's the difference between Asians and Asian Americans? I'm not going to give you complicated demographics about, well, there's Filipinos and there's Koreans and I'm not going to do any of that, okay? There are many books and courses you can take to learn more about that, and I hope you will. I'm also not going to talk this morning about, if you yourself are not an Asian American, what can you do about anti-Asian hate? I'm not going to give you a list of things you can do. I invite you to find out for yourself things that you can do if you are not Asian American, because obviously the only way anything is going to change is if we show up for one another, right? But I am going to talk today about what some Asian Americans who I know are saying and doing about anti-Asian hate. And in fact, this is essentially all of the Asian Americans that I know in one way or another, because this affects all of us. So I'm going to share a few, a few testimonies, as it were, from people that I know. In fact, I'm going to tell you about 2 friends and 3 cousins and 1 poet you all already heard a few words from, and that's Tracy Kato Kiriyama. I'll come back to her as I proceed. Of course, I have to offer a trigger warning. I'm talking about hate, and with hate comes ugly, terrible things, right? So I have to indicate that some of what I'm going to be talking about and some of the images I'm going to show are dreadful and could be triggering for some of you, perhaps should be triggering for all of us, right? But I do give you that warning. We start with this image. This is just a block from here, right? This is the alleyway between, what is now University and 9th Streets, between Orange and Main. There's this alleyway, right? And you see Rosalind Sagata standing in that alleyway. This is an article that was published in the Press Enterprise, so not too long ago, about a year ago. And this alleyway is all that remains of what was once Riverside's first Chinatown. And in fact, that Chinatown was violently closed down, and the Chinese who lived there were, as is usually said, relocated to the Tecasquite Arroyo, what is now referred to as Riverside's Chinatown, which is actually the second Chinatown in Riverside, because Chinese were driven out of downtown Riverside. And they were done so through sustained efforts, as you can see. There was a fire. There was a sustained, ugly newspaper campaign led by the editor of that newspaper. His name was Luther Holt. There was legal harassment of the residents and the shopkeepers in the downtown Chinatown. That Chinatown did not just quietly disappear. It was disappeared. It was closed down. The people who lived there were driven out. So what's the context for these kinds of things? First of all, what is a hate crime? Well, a lot of governments, city governments, choose not to call something, or they don't easily come to calling something, naming something a hate crime. And this is for several reasons. First of all, it looks really bad for a city to have hate crimes, right? So it's bad optics, of course. It's bad PR for a city to have hate crimes taking place, and it's and within its borders. There's also the matter that the US government definition of a hate crime carries, standards with it. Sometimes those standards are hard to meet in legal terms. And yet, with the recent massacre in Buffalo, New York, it was kind of thrilling in a terrible way for many of us to see one of the Buffalo police commissioners step up, and without having gone through some long, complicated process of consultation and legal definition, he simply said, what happened in the top supermarket was a hate crime. He simply named it as such. And that's a step in the right direction, I guess is what I would say. I'm not going to give you lots of numbers this morning, but let me just say that there is, of course, a broader context for anti-Asian hate. The FBI and the US Department of Justice keep close track of reported hate crimes in the United States and the nation as a whole. And in the year 2020, which is the most recent information available, they named over 8,000 hate crimes that were the result of, as they say, single bias that is directed towards a single form of difference. But there were a number of other incidents that were the basis of, intersectional hate, let's call it that. But look at the colorful wheel on the right. You know, clearly a majority of hate crimes that take place are around ethnicity and race, followed not too far behind by hate crimes around sexual orientation. Now, if we compare what happened in 2020 with those statistics with 2014, there were changes. There was a rise in hate crimes, simply put. You know, and again, let's remind ourselves that probably a lot of hate crimes do not get reported or recorded or included in those numbers, right? But what's interesting here, of course, is that especially the number of race-based, ethnicity-based hate crimes went up between 2014 to 2020, pretty significantly. You know, those numbers are significant in statistical terms. And of course, the context behind that is look at the time period. It was because of the White House administration between 2016 and 2020 and the way in which hate was encouraged and allowed, right? So the numbers have gone up. The numbers have gone up. After the massacre in Atlanta in 2021, a number of Asian Americans stepped forward, you know, in a way that was unusual and historically unprecedented, a kind of, you know, drawing together and politicization and all of this, I would argue, riding on the heels of the Black Lives Matter movement, and a kind of wokeness took place in the Asian American community that was really pretty, you know, pretty inspiring for me. And so you see, this is just one example of a, you know, particularly thoughtful and articulate and important Asian American actor stepping up right away after the murders in Atlanta and saying, it was a hate crime, regardless of what anybody else wants to define it as. In the Asian American community, we know it was a hate crime. So I want to turn now to the matter of how Asian Americans talk amongst ourselves about these matters. You know, there's the public-facing stuff that happens, but then there's also the ways in which we talk amongst ourselves to each other in Asian American safe spaces, whether it's friends or family, you know, or Asian American studies programs or whatever. We talk amongst ourselves quite a bit, as a matter of fact. I grew up with this in my extended Chinese American family. We talked about race and racism all the time, because it was part of my relatives' living daily experience, right? So let me tell you about what a Sansei friend of mine said to me just about 2 weeks ago. We met in Little Tokyo for dinner that night. We were all about to go to a concert. There were 6 of us at dinner in a nice Japanese American restaurant on First Street. And as we sat down, the news about the Buffalo shootings had just been breaking over the last hour or so. So we sat down with our heads and our hearts full of that news, that breaking news. And first we talked about that and worked through what had or had not happened in Buffalo. And then we began to move to our own stories. We began to talk story with each other as we do. And one of my friends, who is Sansei and probably in her late 50s, she grew up in the greater Los Angeles area, deeply connected to the Japanese American and broadly Asian American community. She also has a deep foot in the Chicanx community. She's very much LA, right? And grew up in environments of you know, a multi-ethnic community, right? She suddenly remembered that she had been in Portland, Oregon, some years before. I'm not exactly sure. It almost sounded like it was several decades ago, kind of thing. She said that she remembered she was just visiting Portland for, you know, a short time, and went off to a shopping mall and did what one does in a shopping mall. She walked around, she window shopped, she went into different stores, she had a cup of coffee in the food court. And, you know, she was just like enjoying herself in those kind of low-key kind of ways. And then she suddenly looked around and realized that everyone in the place was white. You know, this was a huge shopping mall and everyone there was white. And coming from Southern California, you know, this was different for her. It had been a long time since she had been in such an environment. And her first response was simply to notice that And then a few minutes later, she began to realize she was feeling a little uneasy. And then as a few more minutes went by, she began to realize that she was actually feeling anxious about it. And as she related, this had nothing to do with the way anyone was interacting with her directly. No one had said anything to her. No one had given her stink eye. There was nothing direct about it. For her, it was simply being in an all-white environment, basically, as the lone Asian American. And you have to recall, she's Sansei. She comes from a community and a family that had been incarcerated during World War II, right? So none of this was like just, paranoia, right? This is coming from a very deep place of family and community history, of remembering what can happen, knowing what can happen, under white supremacy is what I'm saying. So that's one story from one friend today, and she told us the story over dinner, still clearly kind of processing all of it. Let me share another story. I have this big Chinese American family. They are my family, as I said. I have all these cousins, and now I have second cousins, and it's a great family. A couple of months ago, one of my cousins reached out to three of us. So there were four of us doing a little email back and forth conversation for a few days. And the cousin who started it, and all of us are middle-aged women, basically. My first cousin sort of emailed the other three of us and said, hey, is anti-Asian violence like a cloud hanging over you when you're out and about? Should we worry about our moms? Should I worry more about my boys? And I'm not sure how this affects directly or subliminally my own behavior. Okay, I confess to carrying a screwdriver in my bag when I went downtown at one point. It was so eerily empty during the height of COVID, I oddly felt more vulnerable for being one of the few Asians, implied Asians, out and about. Is that nuts? Grand pause where the three of us thought about that. And then another cousin wrote back to all of us and said, the events of the last few months have made me pretty anxious, especially on the subway. She lives in New York City. I no longer listen to music, and I'm very aware of where I stand on the platform and who's around me. And then the other cousin, who lives in Boston, wrote back to all of us and said, I am totally scared for my sister and our mother and all our Asian friends and family who live and work in the 5 boroughs of the greater New York City area. So this is just 4 cousins swapping stories, thinking about, acknowledging that fear is part of our lives in a new way that's also an old way, right, at the same time. Let me share another story. Nobuko Miyamoto is now a very dear friend. She lives in LA, she's Sansei. You're gonna hear one of her songs at the end of the service. She's a musician, she's a dancer, she's a performer, she's an activist, oh, she's so many things. This is the cover of her memoir, which was just published about a year ago. What a life she has had. She is an activist through and through. She was a legendary figure in the Asian American community. She was part of the creation of the Asian American movement in the 1960s and 70s. And she's 3rd generation Japanese American, and she was incarcerated as a child with her family. First at the Santa Anita racetrack that was used as a gathering point for Japanese being sent off to the camps, right? And then went on from there. So she was a child in the camps. When the Atlanta massacre took place, she sat down and just like in a white heat wrote an op-ed that she actually did not end up publishing anywhere, but she shared it with me, and here are some excerpts from it. She wrote, since the Atlanta massacre, I've been living between weeping and raging, like when George Floyd and Breonna happened. It's the kind of violence that shakes you to the core and shows you what kind of country you live in. I'm not waiting around for a sheriff to decide if what happened in Atlanta was a racist act. I'm not holding my breath to hear the FBI claim it's a hate crime. There's been too much attention already to the murderer and not to the women, the Asian women whose lives were taken, names we have to hunt for, and stories we've had to wait to hear. Well, guess what? You don't get to decide if it's a racist hate crime. I, like my Asian American sisters and brothers, have decided. We know. A poem, a poem. You've already heard a few words from Tracy Kato Kiriyama, thanks to Grace. A few days after the murders in Atlanta in March of 2021, Tracy wrote and then published on her Instagram a poem that she wrote about all of that, her response to the killings in Atlanta. I invite you to befriend her on Instagram. She's pretty amazing. She's based in LA. She's a poet. She's a community organizer. She's many things. There's her Instagram handle. And the poem, as you can see, is titled Thus. You are not disposable. Our communities of color, of otherness, of marginalization, of women, femme, girls, of trans or non-binary or vulnerable or unique or aging or ill or diseased bodies, we are not disposable. We belong to each other. We are ultimately beholden to each other. And we are a larger we than we sometimes often seem to think and act upon. Sorry, I can't see the top line. This is not only the time to point to specific surges of awareness on anti-Asian disposability. This is also the time to deepen and broaden and reach, bring in and build further. This is a time to realize our connective tissue across struggles, across bodies, across time. When we stay siloed and splintered in our issues, white supremacy wins. It's what white supremacy wants. It's what white supremacy has always intended. For us to, sorry, I'm clicking through various screens that make it hard for me to see every line. Okay, let me go back here. Oh no, and it will only let me go backwards. Okay, hold on. Oh, use the arrows. Thank you, Alec. Alec is on it. Yeah. When we stay, for us to stay in separate lanes, parched, anxiety-ridden, and barely able to keep up with our own community's nightmares, and then hardly capable of coming up for air to realize and honor our interconnectedness, our need for perpetual solidarity. When we don't speak on one tragedy as related to a greater system of negative, obliterative, and violent action towards what is different or other than the given status quo and mainstream accepted power, white supremacy and patriarchy win. We are under the collective gun of white supremacy. What am I afraid of? Before violence, I'm afraid of isolation, of the perception and existence of disconnection, of a pervasive us and them mentality, that folks are less than human, that folks are less than important and vital. I am afraid of disposability. And when folks in and with historical or longstanding or cultural or institutional power look upon one as an other who is less than human or less than important and vital, who is disposable, we witness the devastation of a wicked combination of the worst results and rarely any justice or peace. And we are all left in pain, suffering, and defeat. What can I do today? Beyond wishing I were more powerful, I can keep reaching out further, bringing in more, keep unlearning and relearning and rebuilding forward. I can keep insisting we connect the dots. I can keep showing up. I can keep telling you, I see you in your invisibility. I have found you in your disappearance. I hold you in your emptiness. We belong here in each other's gaze, self-determined and the healing of our bodies, visible in our peace, laughing, giggling, and soft in our love. That's a poem by Tracy Kato Kiriyama. Let me begin to draw this to a close. This matter of anxiety and fear, sure, it's a feeling, but it's not just a feeling, right? It's not just anecdotal. It's not just impressions that Asian Americans have. Again, I keep saying there's a long history. Let me just very briefly say, of course, the history is here and now. This is a recent map of anti-Asian hate acts across the United States. This is a really important historical account of how Chinese were driven out of different communities in California. It's by Jean Failser. I highly recommend it. And she did a lot of mapping with her research assistants of the 19th into the early 20th centuries. And this rather stunning map is a map of over 200 quote unquote roundups of Chinese in California communities between 1849 and 1906. And you can see all those dots are communities where Chinese were, by driven out, it doesn't mean like, oh, over time they left. It means that often in the course of a few hours or a single night, all of the resident Chinese would be gathered up and taken out of town, usually with a crowd of white men behind them. This is, a matter of historical fact. And please notice that the bottom there is where we are, right? This happened here. It happened in Mentone in Ontario and Redlands and San Bernardino, and I would argue in Riverside. So Asian Americans know that anti-Asian hate isn't like special or unique or, one of a kind. In fact, it's related to other forms of hate. Of course it is. Of course it is. It's the interrelationships between all these forms of hate that give them their power, right? That give them their power. And ultimately that set us against each other as communities of color, as aggrieved communities. White supremacy relies on zero-sum relationships between aggrieved communities, is my argument here. And Asian American hate is bound up with all of these other forms of hate, even if that is not explicit, even if it's not explicit. And so here are some of the recent acts of, color on color violence, people of color reaching out, beating, killing Asian Americans. What is going on with that, right? And I don't want to simply explain it away as mental illness or whatever. We're talking about structural and systemic issues here. What happens when it's other people of color striking out against Asian Americans? Often in very public places, right? Very public places. I apologize for these images. At a certain level, I think it's hard to look at them, but it's important to look at them, right? And here's where I really am going to wrap up. What do Asian Americans do about all of this? We organize. We organize. It's ultimately the only way anything ever changes, right? One of the things we do when we organize is we protect ourselves. There was an amazing article came out in the New Yorker just a few months ago in March of 2022 about this group of women in New York City who have created self-defense classes by and for Asian American women. And the article is full of these really gorgeous photographic portraits of the women involved. I strongly recommend this article. It's very well done. It's quite inspiring. We organize. Importantly, we work in solidarity with other communities. In the 1960s, Yuri Kochiyama worked closely with Malcolm X directly. In fact, they had the same birthday. That's a coincidence, but they had the same birthday. And those of us in the Asian American community are very proud of that. They worked together. And Yuri Kochiyama not only stood side by side with Malcolm, but she took the principles that he put together for Black struggle and drew them into the Asian American movement in very direct ways, ways that are remembered and acknowledged. In Los Angeles, this group, Vigilant Love, is based in LA, comes out of Little Tokyo, was originally focused very strongly on Islamophobia and anti-Muslim hate, and now has expanded its charge and its purpose and its mission to, looking at the ways in which liberation will only happen if all of us are free, right? Here's some of the women who have put together and worked on and worked with Vigilant Love over many years. You see them at Manzanar, one of the sites of the Japanese American incarceration. Second from the left is Tracy Kato Kiriyama. Check out their t-shirts. That's a rephrasing of Malcolm's, right? Yeah. In fact, many progressive Asian Americans pursue solidarity work at this point, and especially Japanese Americans, and that is no coincidence. That has everything to do with, the hard lessons learned from the incarceration, the hard lessons learned in terms of how civil liberties are really more fragile than you might think, right? So the Japanese American Citizens League has been amazing since the 1930s, actually, in terms of connecting Japanese American struggle to other struggles, right? So they tend to come right out the gate very quickly whenever there are hate crimes around the United States. Nikkei progressives have been like such an important organization, Nikkei meaning Japanese immigrants, and they originally worked on reparations and redress for Japanese Americans and then took their struggle beyond that. They continue to work and to work very effectively. As you can see, these are all workshops that they organized for this month. Tsuru for solidarity. In 2016, as it became clear that undocumented immigrants were being put illegally into detention camps around the United States, this group came into being, again, coming out of Little Tokyo in LA, and said, this is history repeating itself. This will not do. And they made it their charge to address illegal detention and these new camps. And they've been like all over it for the last 6 years. So I close here in saying, these matters are both nearby and long-lived, both at once, right? And I leave you with this image of Rosalind Segarra, the current chair of the Save Our Chinatown Committee, standing in the alleyway where the first Riverside Chinatown once stood, just over there. Check it out later. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you so much for having me.
Our closing song today is Black Lives Matter by singer, songwriter, and activist Nobuko Miyamoto. I think Deborah had mentioned a few things regarding this artist. So we invite you now to please sit back and experience the music. Thank you.
Lie in the shadows, waiting for the light, talking story round kitchen table, clear as black and white, black and white, black and white. How many lives have been taken? How many names we don't know? Locked up in cages with dreams, nowhere to go, nowhere to go, nowhere to go. He's my son, he's my brother, he's my husband, he's my lover, she's my sister, she's my mother, she's my friend, she's my other, he's my son, my brother, he's my husband, he's my lover, she's my sister, she's my mother, she's my friend, she's my other. Black lives matter. Black lives matter. Black lives matter to me. Matters to me. Since slavery and lynching, since don't have a Chinaman's chance, since cowboys stole the Indians, your land is my land. Your land is my land. This system gives permission to the one with the biggest gun. But remember David and Goliath, little David won. David won. Little David won. In the moonlight, or the sun, Baltimore or Ferguson, and your home Hollywood in the alley, or your car. Charleston or New York in the subway, on the street. Brooklyn or Royal Heights. Black lives matter. Black lives matter. Black lives matter. To me. He's my son, my brother. He's my husband, my lover. She's my sister, my mother, my friend. He's my son, he's my brother, he's my husband, he's my lover, she's my son. She's my mother, my brother, my friend, my other husband. He's my son, he's my brother, he's my husband, he's my lover, she's my sister, she's my mother, my friend, my other. In the moonlight or the sun, Baltimore or Ferguson, in your home or in the hood, Compton or Hollywood, in the alley or your car, Charleston or New York, in the subway or the street, Brooklyn or Royal Heights. Hey-oh. Baltimore and Ferguson. Everybody knows about Charleston. And everybody knows about Mississippi. Goddamn. Everybody knows about Emmett Till and Oscar Grant. Eric Garner, I Can't Breathe, and Sandra Bland. How many lives have been taken? How many names we don't know? How many locked up in cages with dreams, nowhere to go, nowhere to go. Black lives matter. 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 Black lives matter.
If here you have found freedom, take it with you into the world. If you have found comfort, go and share it with others. If you have dreamed dreams, help one another that they may come true. If you have known love, give some back to a bruised and hurting world. Go in peace. Namaste, amen, and blessed be. Thank you, Deborah, for sharing your valuable time and insights with us this morning. It is sincerely appreciated, and we look forward to seeing you again. If it's okay with you, Deborah, if there are those of us in the audience who would like to stay in the sanctuary for 10 to 15 minutes for questions or to share some observations from the service, would that be all right? Okay, so those who wish to do so, please remain in the sanctuary or online. And please be aware that these comments will be posted online. For the rest of you, you are now welcome to adjourn into the parish hall. Deborah will invite you to come back up to the pulpit. Sorry, we didn't tell you in advance. There's some comments or questions. Okay.
Hi. Oh, the mic. Okay.
Hello, my name is Adriana, and first of all, I'd just like to say thank the Unitarian Church, because I've never gotten so much from any type of organized religion, if you would, in such little time since I've been here. And this particular discussion, I didn't know how to approach it, to be honest with you, because every time you said white supremacy, I kept on looking at my skin. You know, you're looking at a man here. Remember the man that was walking in front of the tank in Tenement Square? You know, he had his bags, like he was coming home back from school or coming back from work, you know, facing a tank. And that's where we're at today, people. You know, you talk about white supremacy. I mean, the internment camps, oh my God. You know, I'm white, and I've been like this since I was 10 years old, and I was really enjoying life, and then all of a sudden, I was having a lot of problems in life, and somebody turned me on to Jim Nabors. Does anybody know who Jim Nabors is? Well, Jim Nabors was someone in this country who was loved. He was Gomer Pyle, by the way. Surprise, surprise, surprise. Well, the reason why I bring this up is because he was absolutely loved by the white man, right? The white supremacy that we're talking about. And he was a part of them. And just because of perspective, he had a different perspective, they literally blackballed him. Okay, how can you ask of something from something when they can't even do it for themselves? Okay, I grew up in a time before Jerry Springer, and I remember when I was young being told, you know, what the H am I? And I'm like, I don't know what the H are you? I grew up in a time where I don't remember saying no or asking questions. I was told what to eat, what to dress, so it wasn't my idea, but bottom line, I grew up with not understanding who I was, and the rest of the people around me didn't understand who I was. So what does human nature do? We attack, we destroy. Okay, and even more now than ever, with all the dissension, the last thing we have is we've lost the ability to see each other or see ourselves in each other's eyes. So until that happens, I'm so afraid that nothing's going to change. If anything, it's going to get worse. And also in some perspectives, for a Messiah to come, things, I guess, do got to get worse. So in one aspect, I want to rejoice, but in the other aspect, I'm trying to find hope, because I've been in this town 12 years. 12 years, I think I've been here. I've only had one parking ticket in this town, and I even got that retracted. The other day, a police officer, a situation happened, and I walked away with my friend. That the officer didn't know that she was my friend. The cop told her, stay away from that guy. He is trouble. Didn't even ask me my name. And she explained, well, you know, the situation. If anything, he was the one protecting us. And the guy that he was the bad guy. And this is the supervisor said, whatever it thinks it is, it's bad news. And didn't even ask me my name. And actually even told me not to even call them. I've never even heard of cops telling a civilian, a citizen not to call them, even if it's for BS. So again, and this was a white again, supervisor, peace officer for the city of Riverside. How can we, I mean, these are people of power that are looking down on us. They just see us. They don't see color, but they definitely see perspectives. So again, I don't know where to go with this other than, again, thank you for allowing me to be here and to show me enough love for myself so that way I can love myself. Because this is a safe spot, okay? No matter what you are, I love this place. But outside, you know, I don't see where anything can change because this is just mentality of man's nature. Man, this is a nature thing that we're trying to change. And I don't know. But anyhow, thank you for your time. And I'm so sorry for being so long-winded.
Thank you for sharing that. Your name is Adriana, right? Okay, thank you. Thank you. Please.
This had been, when it comes to defending oneself as an Asian, I'm asking this as a question because one time I had gone down to UCR and a group of pretty far out, when they have a 9-foot tall banner screaming at people for being liable to be burnt by God, it was problematic. It wasn't so much Asian hate in this hate is a group of white over-the-top evangelicals screaming at a bunch of young Asian kids going to school at UCR. And because I'm older, I suddenly realized these kids are getting jumped on and they're not defending themselves because they have been taught to be polite. Does the act, you know, the stopping the Asian American hate, is it harder to get that momentum going with young adults, or is it better now than it was? That'll do.
I love your question. What's your name, by the way?
The same name is a terrible human history.
Okay.
William Joseph Casey.
Oh my goodness.
North's boss.
Thank you for sharing that. Oh my goodness. I mean, you're asking about whether historically some corners of the different Asian American communities have learned to keep their heads down, I think is partly what you're talking about, as opposed to other communities that have become more politicized and even militant over time, right? I would simply say that within the Asian American community, which is big, right? And it comes from many different, you know, countries of origin and so on and so forth. We have the whole, we have all possible responses in our community. And I should say that, you know, just this morning I was kind of, you know, refreshing myself on local Riverside, SoCal, Riverside County, Asian American history. And in Redlands in the 1880s, it was like 1885-ish, apparently the Chinese, when they found themselves, you know, in danger of being driven out of their community, which they eventually were, they armed themselves first. They armed themselves, you know? So, I mean, I'm like nonviolent until the cows come home, right? But a part of me like really admires that, really admires, you know, the having the strength to stand up and say no, right? You know, because again, nothing ever changes unless someone says no. And sometimes does violence have to be met with violence? That's something that each of us has to answer for ourselves. But within the Asian American community, there have been those who have said no more. Thank you for sharing what you saw at UCR. Yeah.
Hello. First, I want to say the sermon in a whole was very good and well put together. I'm gonna specifically talk about one part within the whole that obviously doesn't represent the whole, but just speaking as, you know, a Black man watching this presentation. First, want to appreciate the way it was opened with the NAACP Stop Asian Hate. and then like sandwiching it with the Black Lives Matter song, which was beautifully done. And I weeped over there watching. But the segment of images of Black men perpetuating violence against Asian was particularly hard to watch for a couple of reasons. One, which is a practice amongst a lot of Black people and a lot of just people in general in this country, of whenever there's a crime, there's that weight of seeing the ethnicity of the perpetrator. Because we know in this country that we all get painted by whoever commits those crimes. And so whenever I see a Black person, Black man in particular, like it's all immediate, because I know, right? Like I know when I walk down the street, I've seen people go to the other side of the street. I am not a violent person, but that's not what people see. And so when I see those images, I see some of that, like Black men being painted as violent, which often is why police officers don't see justice. It's because juries also see that Black men are threatening, so of course they need to protect themselves, which obviously I don't need to tell the people here is not what Black men are. But then it's just another part of your, which is really important, is just the solidarity and what is kind of propped up to push us against one another. So I think most notably, like the model minority myth that is used to show why it's okay to not care about Black people because other minorities were given the same opportunities and they thrive, when obviously we know the history and the deep-rooted racism that hold people down. But just to say that, like, the complexity and the difficulties in solidarity, ultimately I see kind of going away. Like I've seen from like the Islamic communities missing like what has kept from solidarity. I've seen like from here and other examples of Asians coming up and saying like there has been racism amongst our people. Like, I mean, I hate to like separate us in ethnicities and races that were kind of defined by white supremacy, which is ultimately what a lot of this is, right? The game was put together by white supremacy, and instead of playing a different game, like we're kind of playing these same games. And I mean, ultimately, I see like us getting out of those games and coming to like a higher understanding and stronger solidarity.
That was amazing. Thank you, for the thoughtfulness that you brought to that analysis. I don't think I need to respond. I think I need to take in what you just said, and to say thank you. And to say that, of course, I thought twice about including those images, right? But when I see people of color hating other people of color, I see white supremacy. I think that's pretty clear, right? Yeah. Sorry. Oh, okay. John on Zoom, we understand you have a question. Would you like to speak up and share it?
There, I had to wait for him to unmute me. My younger brother is married to a second generation Japanese person. Her parents were first generation Japanese. They were both interned in those camps. and that's where they met. He has written books, in fact, about his experiences there. He's written a number of hymnals that are in Methodist hymnals. They're singing those. They probably don't even know they were written by a Japanese person. My question to you is, my dad had a collection of over 500 pieces of what he called occupied Japan. They were stamped on the bottom, occupied Japan. And he told me something about after World War II, nobody wanted to buy stuff from Japan because they were in the war against us. So they had to stamp everything they made occupied in Japan. So that people knew when they bought it, it was made in the part of Japan that we occupied. Can you talk more about that?
Thank you, John. Say more about which aspect? Come back.
Perhaps speak on the impact of World War II and the fact that Japanese were at around that time.
Oh, okay. World War II. Okay, sure. Oh gosh, John. And I think you said it was your father was in occupied Japan, as I assume as US military. And I've actually, done a fair amount of research on Japanese American soldiers who were stationed in Japan during the occupation and the experiences that they had. Right. So the connections between what happened in World War II in Japan are very directly felt in the JA community in the United States, including the bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, right? I mean, there's, the direct family impact on many Japanese Americans. So these connections between what happened there and what is known and remembered and experienced in the Japanese American community. It's very direct. It's very direct. I'm not sure, if you wanted something more specific than that, but thank you for asking. Any other thoughts, Alec?
Thank you. Thank you so much for speaking for us today, Deborah. I wanted to mention just a few things that really resonated with me. I really appreciated those historical images, especially those images from the American protests from the 50s and 60s that were in black and white, and the short clip of Tiananmen Square. And when I see those, I feel like as a young white man, I feel like I've been duped in a way by our American culture, that those things, they teach them to us as part of history, like Greek ancient history, but that's not history. That's like those white people screaming at Blacks and Asians. Those are my grandparents. Those are the grandparents of people like me. Those people who are being screamed at those aren't people from back in history. Those are our parents and my generation's parents and indeed from even perhaps your parents and your grandparents. And I was sort of given the cultural impression that those things are distant and in the past, and that we live in a post-racial society. But those things are right there. Like Tiananmen Square was in 1989. That was just 30 years ago, and it feels like those. It was at least for white men my age, we have this idea of, oh, you have that racist grandma who you don't try to change them because they've thought that way for decades. So what are you going to do? But those people are the ones who raised us. That didn't just disappear. It's all still built into how you and I were raised. And I also wanted to mention great salient points about interracial crime and those interracial interactions. And yeah, like we've talked about this as well in the past, and I feel that what happens in those kinds of situations is that racism and racialization sort of happened to everybody in that situation. Those, especially looking at Black and Asian violence, exactly as you said, this sort of mono-minority dynamic is all imposed by whiteness. Those labels are made by, are defined by an exclusion from the in-group of whiteness. And those, and the fact, and it's to use a poor analogy, you know, when you're looking to pick a fight in a bar, you pick the easiest target, you pick the lowest hanging fruit. And so the fact that these groups have been racialized by white society makes it easier for them, much easier for them to commit crime to each other, that compared to the kind of backlash and the punishments they would get committing that crime on the hegemony. I don't have a question, but if you'd like to comment.
Thank you, Alec. I mean, you know, everything you said is just like so spot on, and just really, you know, I have ever so many responses to it. I guess a couple of responses that might seem unrelated, but I don't think they are. The one is that although a lot of these experiences end up being the experiences of individuals, clearly from what you said, you understand that in the end, it is all structures and systems that you know, locate certain histories in us as individuals, right? Yeah, so I think I agree, if that's what you were saying, that we can't simply dismiss the racist grandma as being that was then, this is now, right? And that ultimately, I mean, in my personal opinion, coalition work is the only way to actually create systemic change. You know, I don't not believe in the power of face-to-face individual interactions as a way of changing things, but I actually am now all about structures and systems in all kinds of ways. I should say, and this will seem unrelated, but it's not, that Japanese Americans at this point in time and since the incarceration have been very solidly dedicated towards self-documentation of their own communities. And I find this to be an extremely useful intervention into the matter of whether history was then and not now, right? For Japanese Americans who are at all politicized, history is always right now. You know, yes, back then too, but right now, very importantly. And so what that does is kicks into motion the possibility of response and change all at the same time, right? And my final observation will be that, you know, I don't make any assumptions about looking out at those of you here, but you know, in majority white spaces, the kinds of coalitional work that progressive majority white communities can do, it's so important. It's so important. And that means usually standing with, learning from, you know, those kinds of efforts are absolutely essential. So that's one of many reasons why I'm just like super happy to be with you today. Yeah, thank you for that, Alec.
Thank you for that, Deborah. I'd also like to thank Adam Whittaking, who's the chair of our Social Environmental Justice Committee, for inviting Deborah to come and speak with us today. Thank you so much. Okay, so we are finished for today, and we now invite you to adjourn into the parish hall for fellowship. Thank you.